how to respond to ignorant and/or offensive comments about autism. So last week I released a video with a list of things of what not to say to autistic people. This week we're looking at different ways you might like to respond when encountering ignorance and intolerance in the community. I'll share some of the strategies and insights I've heard from others, and also outline my own personal approach to tackling this situation. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So before we jump into how to respond to ignorant and/or offensive comments, what do you think? Is it your responsibility to educate other people about autism? Take a second to let me know right now what you think in the comments, because this question lies at the heart of how I can respond. If it is my responsibility to educate the ignorant people around me, I'm going to respond very differently to if I don't believe it's my responsibility at all. So the answer, well, my answer at least, is yes and no. It is both my responsibility to educate others and not my responsibility to educate others. That might sound paradoxical, but the question itself sets up a binary that doesn't need to exist. Instead, my answer would be yes, I do have some responsibility to educate people around me. However, it is not my sole responsibility to educate the people around me. What that means is if for whatever reason I don't have capacity to do that, if I'm too tired or too upset or too overwhelmed or just can't be bothered on a particular day, then that's completely fine, because it is not my sole responsibility to tackle general ignorance in society. It's a little bit like if I'm walking down the street and I see some litter on the ground. Is it my responsibility to pick it up and put it in a rubbish bin? It would be fantastic if I did, and the world would probably be a better, cleaner place if more people picked up rubbish that was not their own and put it in the bin. But at the same time, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility to clean up after other people. So with that in mind, there are several approaches as to how you might like to respond to ignorant and/or offensive comments and behavior, and it really depends on the context, especially your personal context, as to which one is going to be the best for you at the time. So in general, 3 categories of responses might be: number 1, get upset, fight back, tell someone how inappropriate they are. In other words, react emotionally in the situation, let people see how upset you are. That's one common reaction. Number 2, another option could be to calmly educate the person, giving them knowledge that they didn't have access to before to help them fill in the gaps and have a better understanding in future. Interestingly, I actually personally dislike the word educate, since it can sometimes be used in a bit of a condescending way. But in general, this option is to calmly and intelligently attempt to address the ignorance that you've seen. And option number 3 is to ignore it altogether. In other words, pick your battles. You can't fight them all. Some situations are going to lend themselves more to speaking up than others. And so sometimes maybe the best option is to simply say nothing. This is an especially popular option if in your situation, sticking your neck out might actually be harmful or dangerous. If saying something is going to compromise my safety in a situation, then saying nothing might be a very wise choice. So when faced with these 3 options, which one do we choose? It would be nice if the world were a more compassionate and inclusive place, but the fact is that currently many people have outdated and even harmful views of autism. And the reality is that you'll probably pay a heavy price for that. So it's no wonder you're upset. This affects you personally. The level of ignorance and/or understanding in the general population makes a qualitative difference to your daily life. So it would be really nice if people were less dismissive and condescending and actually included you and treated you nicely. But unfortunately, we know that things are not going to change overnight. So there's a concept in life coaching which I find really helpful, which is the distinction around short-term and long-term strategies. Ultimately, we want to have both. I want a happy life now. I want a strategy that works now, today. And at the same time, I also want to work for a better tomorrow. The challenge, and I won't go too much into the details here, is that the best short-term strategy is usually the worst long-term strategy, and vice versa. So how do I strike a balance between being okay today, protecting my own safety, my own emotional resources, for example, and also step up and try and help society understand autism better in future? So to help us answer this question, here are some insights from the community that I found particularly profound. So in answer to the question, what should NTs stop saying to autistic people? Jason says, nothing, because controlling people is a waste of time. I don't get fed up or upset. I just move on because they're just people and not my villain. I still hold the door for them and smile because for me, it feels better to be nice than to resent. Interesting perspective. I wonder if any of you can relate to that. Or this one, we can't control or change other people. We can explain, but we can't understand for them. Or this one, I do not know the ins and outs of various other psychological diagnoses. Why would I expect them to know or care about mine? Most people I encounter are not malicious. So you can see these types of responses sit somewhere between calmly educate and just ignore, pick your battles. I also thought this one was really interesting. We do not have control over what other people do, but some people have the privilege of most people just leaving them alone. So if we read into what that's implying, some people have the privilege of just ignoring and picking your battles and masking and passing as neurotypical and being relatively safe in most situations, which implies others do not. So while it might be fantastic to have the position and emotional resources to take the other person's perspective and recognize that they're not trying to be a villain, etc., a lot of the time for a lot of people, that might not be a viable option. And that's where option one of reacting emotionally comes in. If you're upset, you're upset. It would be fantastic if you were not upset and if the actions of the other person did not hurt you, but the fact is that they did. And sometimes showing your emotions, as raw and inappropriate as they might be in a situation, is the only option available. We can't be expected to hold ourselves together and always be in control 100% of the time, especially when faced with daily systemic challenges. So in the context of short-term and long-term strategies, while we know that getting upset and fighting back might not be a very effective long-term approach, it might, in many situations, be a very appropriate immediate response. So I guess the reason I'm emphasizing this is because it can be tempting to imagine that long-term strategies are necessarily better and more intelligent than short-term strategies, whereas actually surviving today can be even more important than building a better tomorrow. So with all that in mind, here are the 4 steps of my personal approach of how to respond to ignorant and or offensive comments and behavior. And I say 4 steps, but they're almost like 4 principles that don't necessarily follow a particular order. So the first one is give what you can and not what you can't, which means if you have the capacity to educate, fantastic. If not, for whatever reason, then it is absolutely not your sole responsibility to fix all the problems of the world. And if you're dealing with this kind of stuff every day, you're absolutely not going to be able to respond to everything. That doesn't mean give up because you have no influence. It means give what you can and not what you can't. It's better to do 1 small positive thing than 0 small positive things. Number 2, and this is what some of the comments I shared earlier were alluding to, is forgive ignorance. Yes, ignorance in other people can hurt you and can lead them to say or do offensive things, but recognizing that it's not personal and most of the time it's not even intentional can help a lot to diffuse the situation and focus on what's important. And the important thing is acknowledging the negative effect it has on you, and then A, protecting yourself in the situation, and B, working towards a future where it doesn't happen again. So with that in mind, step 3 is acknowledging and validating how you feel about the situation. If you're angry, it doesn't help to tell myself I shouldn't be angry or I shouldn't be upset or wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to react to this situation. If it affects me, end of story. My job now is to acknowledge and deal with that emotional reaction in a helpful way. So often what that looks like is venting all of the anger and frustration to someone who actually cares, to someone who can listen and hold space for that. There are appropriate and inappropriate places to vent emotions. If I vent to an inappropriate place, I will not be heard, I will not be understood, I'll probably incite other people to get even more angry and invalidate me even more and tell me how much I'm wrong, and that's unlikely to be helpful for anyone. So if I can vent to someone who cares, I get what I need, I can acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, the wrongdoing and the injustice in the situation potentially, all in a safe place that's not going to have negative ramifications for me later. And finally, number 4 is demand respect. And I'm not sure if demand is the right word here, because you can't force someone to respect you, just like you can't force someone to understand or force someone to listen. But what I can do is insist that I should be respected and state that that's a non-negotiable thing that I'm not willing to tolerate. I'm not sure how well I'm explaining this, but it's essentially a form of assertiveness where I'm standing my ground without attacking the other person and without retreating either. And it doesn't necessarily have to be active. I could demand respect without actually saying anything by simply acting on my unwillingness to tolerate a situation, which might look like leaving or disengaging or protecting myself in another way. Anyway, I think we might be getting a little bit too complicated for this initial question, so I might leave it there for today. I'm curious to hear how you generally respond to ignorant and or offensive comments or behavior. Do some of the options I've mentioned resonate more strongly than others? Maybe there's an idea I've mentioned today that you'd like to try for yourself next time. So please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. Otherwise, thanks again for watching. I hope you found this discussion interesting and valuable, and I will see you again next week. Bye.